The silence in the VIP suite of the obsidian room was heavier than the gold chandelier hanging above it. Grant Sterling, a man whose net worth hovered in the billions, sat with a smirk plastered across his face, confident that his money could buy him out of the humiliation he had just caused. He had just called Isabella, the quiet waitress filling his water glass, uneducated trash for bumping his table. He didn't know that the woman trembling in the apron wasn't trembling from fear, but from the effort of holding back a laugh. He didn't know that the trash pouring his sparkling water held 3 PhDs and controlled the very bank that was about to foreclose on his empire. When she finally spoke, she didn't apologize. She switched dialects, and Grant Sterling's world began to crumble. The obsidian room was the kind of establishment where the air conditioning smelled like expensive vanilla and the silence cost $500 a plate. Located on the 45th floor of a sleek tower overlooking Central Park, it was a sanctuary for New York's elite, the hedge fund managers, the oil tycoons, and the old money families who spoke in hushed tones about summering in the Hamptons. For Isabella Certain, the restaurant was simply a place where her feet throbbed and her patience was tested nightly. Isabella adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform in the reflection of a polished brass railing. Her name tag read, Isabella, plain and simple. No surname, no title, just the help. At 26, she had mastered the art of being invisible. To the patrons of the obsidian room, she was a pair of hands that delivered filet mignon and a ghost that refilled wine glasses. She wasn't a person. She was a function. Table 4 needs a refresh on the sourdough, the floor manager, Jeffrey, hissed as he walked past her, snapping his fingers near her ear. Jeffrey was a man who believed that anxiety was a management style. He was terrified of the clientele and took it out on the staff. And for God's sake, fix your apron strings. You look like you've been wrestling in the kitchen. Yes, Jeffrey, Isabella said, her voice calm, devoid of the irritation that flared in her chest. She walked to the service station, her movements precise and graceful. Nobody looked at her. If they had, they might have noticed that her posture wasn't that of a typical server. It was the posture of a ballerina or perhaps a diplomat. They might have noticed that her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room not just for empty glasses, but for social cues, reading the body language of the powerful men and women dining there. Isabella was currently living a double life, though not the kind found in spy novels. 2 years ago, she had been Isabella Harrington, heiress to the Harrington global logistics empire. She had grown up in boarding schools in Switzerland, spent her summers in Tokyo, and her winters in Milan. She had absorbed languages the way other children absorbed cartoons. But when her father, the formidable Arthur Harrington, tried to force her into a strategic marriage to merge their company with a corrupt rival firm, Isabella had refused. The ultimatum had been brutal: marry him or lose everything. Isabella had chosen her freedom. She walked away from the trust fund, the penthouse, and the name. She took her middle name, rented a shoebox apartment in Queens, and got a job waiting tables. She wanted to prove to her father, and to herself, that she could survive without the Harrington safety net. She was 6 months away from finishing her master's thesis on comparative linguistics at Columbia University, paid for with her own tips. Tonight, however, the air in the restaurant felt different. There was a nervous energy radiating from the host stand. "Big night," Sarah, another waitress, whispered as she loaded a tray with dirty dishes. "Jeffrey is losing his mind. Apparently Grant Sterling is coming in." Isabella froze for a fraction of a second. "Sterling? The tech mogul?" "The very same." Sarah rolled her eyes. "He rented out the entire East Wing. Apparently he's trying to close some massive international merger. He's bringing in investors from all over the world. Jeffrey said if we mess this up, we're all fired. Isabella felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She knew Grant Sterling. Not personally, but she knew his type. He was a shark in a bespoke suit, arrogant, loud, and famous for his temper. He had been featured in Forbes not just for his wealth, but for his hostile takeovers. He was the kind of man who viewed service staff as furniture. "Great," Isabella muttered, grabbing a fresh pitcher of water. "Just what we need." "You're on his section," Sarah said sympathetically. "Good luck. I heard he made a waiter at Le Bernardin cry last week because the ice cubes were the wrong shape." Isabella tightened her grip on the pitcher. She had dealt with difficult men before. She had grown up surrounded by them. Grant Sterling was just another bully with a credit card. She would do her job, keep her head down, and go home to her quiet apartment. She didn't know that tonight, keeping her head down would be impossible. At 8:15 p.m., the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Grant Sterling stepped into the obsidian room like he owned the building. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Isabella's entire year of rent. His hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp, and his eyes swept over the restaurant with a look of critical disdain. Flanking him were two nervous-looking assistants, and a woman in a red dress who seemed more interested in her phone than her surroundings. "Jeffrey!" Sterling's voice boomed, cutting through the ambient jazz music. "I specifically requested the lighting be dimmed by 20%. It's like an interrogation room in here." Jeffrey practically sprinted to the entrance, bowing so low Isabella thought he might tip over. "Mr. Sterling, welcome, welcome. I apologize profusely. I will have the lighting adjusted immediately. Right this way to the East Wing." Sterling didn't acknowledge the apology. He just started walking, snapping his fingers at his assistants to keep up. As they passed Isabella's station, Sterling stopped abruptly. He looked at the table she was setting. Table 12. "No," Sterling said, pointing a manicured finger at the centerpiece. "I hate lilies. They smell like a funeral. Get them out of here. I want orchids, white ones, now." He didn't look at Isabella when he said it. He looked at the air above her head. "I will handle it right away, sir," Isabella said, her voice steady. Sterling finally glanced at her, his eyes narrowing, as if seeing a smudge on a pristine window. "And get me a scotch, Macallan 25. Neat. Don't drown it." "Of course." Isabella moved quickly, removing the lilies and signaling a busboy to run to the back for orchids. As she retrieved the scotch from the bar, she watched the rest of Sterling's party arrive. It was an impressive, if chaotic, group. There was Mr. Tanaka, an elderly Japanese gentleman with a stern face, accompanied by two younger aides. There was Madame Lefebvre, a sharp-eyed French woman who looked like she could price a diamond from across the room. There was a boisterous Russian man, Mr. Volkov, who was already laughing loudly at something his translator said. And finally, a quiet, intense man in a grey suit whom Isabella recognized from the news as Mr. Al-Fayed, a major investor from Dubai. It was a United Nations of capital. Sterling was trying to secure funding from all of them simultaneously to save his floundering tech company, Sterling Dynamics. Rumors in the financial pages suggested he was over-leveraged and desperate, but looking at him now, leaning back in his leather chair, he looked like a king holding court. Isabella approached the table with the scotch on a silver tray. She placed it down on a coaster with millimeter precision. "Your drink, sir," she murmured. Sterling ignored her. He was busy gesturing to a young man sitting to his right, his hired translator. "Tell Tanaka that I'm ready to sign the distribution rights for Tokyo if he agrees to the 15% royalty drop, Sterling barked at the translator. The translator, a sweaty young man named Kevin, looked terrified. He fumbled with a notebook. He turned to Mr. Tanaka and spoke in Japanese. Isabella, standing just a few feet away with her tray, felt a wince ripple through her body. Kevin's Japanese was atrocious. He hadn't used the honorific keigo language required for business dealings with an elder. Instead of saying, "Mr. Sterling proposes a mutually beneficial adjustment," Kevin had essentially said, "He wants to cut your money, old man." Mr. Tanaka's face hardened. He said something sharp to his aide in Japanese. "Does this boy have no manners? Is this how Sterling treats us?" Sterling looked at Tanaka's angry face and frowned. He turned to Kevin. "What did he say? Is he happy?" Kevin, sweating profusely, lied. Yes, Mr. Sterling. He says he is considering it deeply." Isabella bit her lip. She should walk away. It wasn't her business. She was a waitress, but the linguistic butchery was physically painful to witness. Sterling clapped his hands. "Good. Now, someone pour the wine. Where is that girl?" He spun around and nearly collided with Isabella, who was waiting for a gap in the conversation to offer water. The sudden movement knocked the water pitcher in her hand. She corrected her balance instantly, saving the pitcher, but a few drops of condensation splashed onto the sleeve of Sterling's suit. The table went silent. Sterling looked at the 3 drops of water on his cuff like they were acid. He slowly looked up at Isabella. "You clumsy idiot," he hissed, loud enough for the entire table and half the restaurant to hear. "I apologize, sir," Isabella said, grabbing a napkin. "You turned quite suddenly. Don't give me excuses." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "This is a $5,000 suit. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea who these people are?" "I do, sir," Isabella said, her chin lifting slightly. "I can fetch some club soda. It will take the watermark right out." "I don't want your club soda," Sterling sneered. "I want a server who has a brain. God, it's so hard to find good help these days. They hire these uneducated nobodies off the street and put them in a room with billionaires." He turned to his guests, letting out a dry, mocking laugh. "My apologies, everyone. The help here is clearly struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation. She probably doesn't even understand what we're doing here. She thinks we're just eating dinner." Madame Lefebvre looked uncomfortable. Mr. Tanaka looked disgusted, but not at Isabella. "Just get out of my sight." Sterling dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Send the manager, and bring us the menus, and try not to drown the menus, okay?" Isabella felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Not shame, anger, pure, cold anger. She tightened her grip on the silver tray until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, performed a slight, dignified bow, and backed away. "As you wish, sir." She walked back to the service station. Jeffrey was already hyperventilating. "What happened? Did you spill on him? Isabella, I swear to God." "He bumped into me, Jeffrey," she said coolly. "He requires the menus. I'll take them." No, send Sarah." "You stay back," Jeffrey panicked. "I am the lead server for the East Wing," Isabella said, her voice dropping an octave, sounding suddenly very much like the daughter of Arthur Harrington. "I will finish the service. If you pull me now, it looks like an admission of incompetence. It makes the restaurant look weak." Jeffrey blinked, stunned by her tone. He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But one more mistake, and you're out. Tonight." Isabella picked up the heavy leather-bound menus. She wasn't going to make a mistake. She was going to make a point. When Isabella returned to the table, the atmosphere had deteriorated from tense to catastrophic. Sterling was trying to conduct 3 negotiations at once, relying entirely on Kevin, the sweaty translator. The problem was, Kevin only seemed to speak passable Spanish and very broken Japanese. He clearly didn't speak Russian or Arabic. Mr. Volkov, the Russian oil magnate, was red in the face. He was shouting something in Russian about the contract terms regarding the pipeline logistics. He was pointing at a document in front of him. "Kevin, what is he saying?" Sterling demanded, wiping his brow. "Is he asking for more equity?" Kevin looked like he was about to vomit. "I think he's angry about the vodka." "Maybe." "The vodka?" Sterling shouted. "We're discussing $1 billion merger, and you think he's mad about vodka?" Isabella moved around the table, placing menus down. She paused behind Mr. Volkov. She understood perfectly what he was shouting. He wasn't talking about vodka. He was saying, "This contract puts all the liability on my shipping fleet. It's a trap. I will not sign this garbage." Sterling turned to the French investor, Madame Lefebvre. "Madame, surely you see the value in the tech integration?" Madame Lefebvre replied in rapid-fire French, her tone icy. "Your technology is obsolete, Mr. Sterling. My engineers tell me your patent expires in 6 months. You are selling us a hollow shell." Sterling looked at Kevin. "Well?" Kevin swallowed hard. "She says she loves the technology. She's just worried about the timing." Isabella paused. She was placing a menu in front of Mr. Al-Fayed. The discrepancy was too big. If Sterling believed Kevin, the deal would collapse the moment the lawyers read the fine print. But worse, Sterling's arrogance was insulting the intelligence of everyone at the table. "Hey," Sterling snapped his fingers at Isabella again. "More wine, and be careful this time." Isabella uncorked a bottle of Cabernet. As she poured for Mr. Volkov, the Russian man slammed his hand on the table again, knocking the contract to the floor. "Idiots!" Volkov shouted in Russian. "I am surrounded by idiots who try to cheat me." Sterling sighed, rolling his eyes. "Look at this temper. These Russians, right? Probably had too much to drink before he got here." He looked at Isabella. "Pick that up, will you?" Isabella set the bottle down. She knelt and picked up the contract. Her eyes scanned the paragraph Volkov had been pointing at. It was a liability clause, poorly translated into Russian, likely by a machine. It didn't say, "liability shared by both parties." It translated, "to liability owned solely by the secondary party." It was a legal insult. Isabella stood up and placed the paper on the table. "It's not the drink, sir," Isabella said softly. Sterling froze. The table went quiet. "Excuse me? Did you just speak?" Isabella looked Sterling in the eye. "Mr. Volkov isn't drunk. He is offended. The contract you gave him contains a translation error in Clause 4B. It states that he is responsible for all maritime accidents, rather than shared responsibility. He thinks you are trying to trick him into bankruptcy." Sterling stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "You read Russian?" "I do," Isabella said. Sterling scoffed, a cruel smile returning to his face. "Oh, this is rich. The waitress reads legal Russian. Did you learn that on Duolingo between shift breaks? Stick to pouring wine, honey. You don't know what you're talking about." He turned to Kevin. "Tell Volkov she's crazy and that the clause is standard." Kevin opened his mouth, but Mr. Volkov spoke first. He looked at Isabella, his eyes narrowing. "You understand me, girl?" he asked in Russian. Isabella replied instantly, her Russian flawless, with the crisp, aristocratic accent of the Moscow elite. "I do, sir. And you are correct. The translation is insulting. It implies your fleet is substandard. However, I believe Mr. Sterling is unaware of the error because his translator is incompetent, not because of malice." Mr. Volkov's jaw dropped. Sterling looked between them. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. The power dynamic in the room shifted by a fraction of an inch. "What did you say to him?" Sterling demanded, standing up. "If you are sabotaging my deal, I will have you arrested. I will have you sued for every penny you— Oh, wait, you don't have any pennies." He laughed, looking around the table for support. "Can you believe the audacity? A waitress interrupting a boardroom discussion." He turned to Madame Lefebvre. "Madame, ignore this sideshow. Let's discuss the funding." Madame Lefebvre leaned forward, looking at Isabella with interest. "Does he treat all his staff this way?" she asked in French. Before Isabella could answer, Sterling cut in. "English, please English. We are in America." Isabella looked at Sterling. "She asked if you treat all your staff this way, Mr. Sterling. She is concerned about the corporate culture of the company she is investing in." Sterling's face turned a shade of purple. "I don't need you to translate. I have a translator." "Your translator," Isabella said, her voice gaining strength, "just told Mr. Tanaka that you wanted to cut his pension, told Madame Lefebvre that her concerns were invalid, and failed to tell you that Mr. Al-Fayed has been asking for water for 20 minutes in Arabic." Kevin, the translator, looked like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Sterling slammed his fist on the table. "That is enough! You are fired! Get out! Jeffrey, get security!" The room was deadly silent. Jeffrey came running from the back, pale as a sheet. "Mr. Sterling, please! I want her out!" Sterling screamed, pointing a finger in Isabella's face. "She is a liar and a fraud. She claims to speak 10 languages or whatever, just to humiliate me. She's probably a corporate spy." He looked at Isabella with pure venom. "You think you're smart? You're a waitress. You carry plates. You are nothing. If you actually knew anything, you wouldn't be wearing that apron." Isabella looked at him. The mask was off. The invisible girl was gone. She slowly untied her apron strings. "I speak 10 languages because I was raised in the embassies of the world, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm but projecting to every corner of the silent room. "And I'm wearing this apron because I chose to earn my own living, rather than rely on Daddy's money. Something you might know a little bit about, given that your company was inherited." Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You want to play games? Fine, let's play." He grabbed a document from Mr. Al-Fayed's stack. It was a complex, technical schematic, written entirely in technical Arabic and Mandarin. "If you're such a genius," Sterling sneered, holding the paper up, "translate this. Right now. If you can translate this entire page perfectly, in front of these witnesses, I'll give you a tip. I'll give you $10,000. But if you can't, you get on your knees and apologize to me and my guests for wasting our time." The guests watched, fascinated. It was a cruel bet. The document was incredibly dense. Even a native speaker would struggle with the technical jargon. Isabella looked at the paper. Then she looked at Sterling. "Keep your money, Grant," she said, using his first name for the first time. "But if I translate it, you have to listen to what I have to say next, without interrupting." "Deal," Sterling smirked. "Go ahead, genius. Entertain us." Isabella took the paper. She didn't look at it for more than 3 seconds. She didn't need to. She recognized the logo on the header. It was a schematic from Harrington Global, her father's company. She took a breath, looked at the stunned faces around the table, and began to speak. The silence in the obsidian room had texture now. It was thick, suffocating, and centered entirely on the woman standing in the center of the East Wing, holding a document meant only for the eyes of high-level engineers and billionaire investors. Isabella didn't begin with a stutter or a pause. She didn't need to or ah as her brain searched for equivalents. The languages on the page, complex technical Mandarin regarding microprocessor architecture, interspersed with high-level Arabic legalese, concerning intellectual property rights in the Gulf region were as familiar to her as the nursery rhymes of her childhood. She began to speak, her voice clear, modulated, and possessing an authority that seemed alien coming from someone wearing a polyester uniform. The document is a due diligence report commissioned by the firm of Harrington Global regarding the viability of Sterling Dynamics' Project Chimera processor unit, Isabella began, looking directly at Mr. Al-Fayed, who sat up straighter at the mention of the originating firm. Sterling let out a snort. "It is not. It's just a schematic. See? She's lying already." Isabella ignored him. She switched flawlessly into fluent, elegant Arabic, addressing Mr. Al-Fayed directly. "Sir, this section details the patent filings in Dubai. It states clearly that the core architecture of the chip was not developed in-house by Sterling Dynamics, but rather licensed from a defunct Taiwanese firm 3 years ago. The license is non-exclusive and expires in 90 days. Mr. Al-Fayed's calm demeanor cracked. His eyes widened. He looked at the document, then at Sterling, his expression darkening from curiosity to suspicion. Isabella didn't stop. She turned her attention to the Mandarin section, addressing Mr. Tanaka. She spoke the crisp, formal dialect used in high-level Beijing boardrooms. "Mr. Tanaka, this segment highlights the thermal throttling issues. The report indicates that during stress testing, the processor overheats by 45% beyond industry safety standards. The cooling solution proposed by Mr. Sterling is noted here as theoretical and currently untestable. The report concludes that mass production in its current state would lead to a catastrophic failure rate of nearly 30% within the first year." The color drained from Grant Sterling's face. It wasn't just that she was translating, it was what she was translating. This was the buried internal memo he thought had been destroyed, a memo written by an external auditor his own board had forced him to hire. How did Al-Fayed get it? "Stop her!" Sterling shrieked, jumping from his chair. "She's making it up. It's gibberish." "Sit down, Grant," Mr. Volkov, the Russian giant, roared. He didn't need a translation to understand the panic in Sterling's eyes. He pointed a meaty finger at Isabella. "Let the girl finish." Isabella continued, her cadence rhythmic, almost hypnotic. She was no longer a waitress. She was a conduit of devastating information. For 10 minutes, she dissected the document. She revealed hidden debt structures concealed in footnotes. She exposed inflated user projection numbers. She translated notes in the margins written by skeptical engineers. She moved around the table as she spoke, making eye contact with each investor in their native tongue. To Madame Lefebvre, she explained in rapid French that the innovative AI integration Sterling had touted was actually a basic algorithm purchased off the shelf. The dining room floor had become a theater of corporate execution. The other diners in the restaurant had stopped eating. The waiters stood frozen against the walls, trays held forgotten in midair. Jeffrey, the manager, was gripping the host stand so hard his knuckles were white, terrified by the spectacle yet unable to look away. Finally, Isabella reached the end of the document. She placed the paper gently back onto the table in front of a stunned Mr. Al-Fayed. She turned to Grant Sterling, who was now standing, gripping the back of his chair, sweating through his expensive suit. He looked smaller than he had 20 minutes ago. The air of invincibility was gone, replaced by the desperate look of a gambler whose bluff had been called in spectacular fashion. "The concluding summary," Isabella said, switching back to English, her voice calm and devastatingly neutral, states that investing in Sterling Dynamics at the current valuation represents an extreme risk and recommends immediate divestment. It is signed by the lead auditor of Harrington Global. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "You owe me $10,000, Mr. Sterling, though I imagine you might need that money for legal fees very soon." Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Kevin, his hired translator, who was staring at Isabella with a mixture of awe and horror. "Kevin," Sterling croaked, his voice weak. "Is that what it says?" Kevin gulped. He picked up the paper, his hands shaking. He recognized a few characters here and there. Mr. Sterling, I think she's right. The characters for failure and debt are everywhere." The investors began to speak all at once, a cacophony of angry Russian, sharp French, confused Japanese, and furious Arabic. They weren't looking at Sterling for answers anymore. They were looking at Isabella. Sterling seemed to snap. The humiliation was too much. His narcissism couldn't process the reality of being dismantled by a servant. "You stole that!" Sterling shouted, lunging toward Isabella, his finger inches from her face. "You are a corporate spy. You planted that document. Who are you working for? Is it Musk? Is it Zuckerberg? I'll have you thrown in prison for espionage." He turned frantically to the table. "Listen to me. She's a fraud. She's just a waitress. A nobody who memorized some lines. Don't you see? It's a setup." He grabbed Jeffrey by the arm as the manager tried to shrink away. "Tell them, Jeffrey. Tell them she's just some uneducated trash you hired off the street last month. Tell them she knows nothing." Jeffrey looked terrified. He looked at Sterling, then at the furious investors, and finally at Isabella, who stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling, please," Jeffrey stammered. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." Sterling laughed hysterically. "This thing is ruining my life with lies." "They aren't lies, Grant," Isabella said softly. "Shut up." "What is your name?" Sterling demanded, screaming into her face. "Tell them your real name so we can find out which gutter you crawled out of." Isabella sighed. It was a sound of profound weariness. She reached up and unpinned the simple plastic name tag that read Isabella. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it onto the silver tray on the table. It landed with a sharp, metallic clink that echoed in the silence. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Sterling," she said. "I haven't been entirely honest with you tonight." She raised her head, her posture shifting subtly. The deference of the service worker evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, aristocratic bearing that belonged in a boardroom, not a dining room. "My name is not just Isabella," she said, her voice ringing clear. "My full name is Isabella Sophia Harrington." She paused, letting the name hit the room like a physical blow. "My father is Arthur Harrington, and the company that wrote the report proving you are a fraud is mine." The name Harrington didn't just mean money. In the circles these people moved in, Harrington meant infrastructure. It meant global logistics, shipping fleets that rivaled navies, and a private equity arm that could topple governments if it chose to call in its debts. Arthur Harrington was not a tech bro hoping for an IPO. He was old, immovable power. The reaction at the table was instantaneous and electric. Mr. Tanaka, who had been looking at Isabella with suspicion, gasped. He immediately stood up and bowed, a deep, respectful bow of 90 degrees, holding the position for several seconds. "Harrington-sama," he breathed in Japanese, his tone reverential. "I had the honor of meeting your grandfather in Kyoto 30 years ago. I apologize deeply for the disrespect shown at this table tonight." Isabella returned the bow perfectly, with the exact degree of angle required for his seniority. "The honor is mine, Tanaka-san. My grandfather spoke highly of your integrity." Madame Lefebvre covered her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "Isabella Harrington, the prodigy who vanished from society 2 years ago. The rumors said you were in an ashram in India." "Queens, actually," Isabella said dryly in French. "The falafel is better." Grant Sterling looked like he had been hit by a truck. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the image of the girl he had abused for an hour with the reality of who she was. "No," Sterling whispered. "No, that's impossible. You're waiting tables. You're wearing an apron. Arthur Harrington's daughter wouldn't be serving me scotch." "I assure you, Grant, the irony is not lost on me," Isabella said coolly. "I left that world because I found it suffocating, filled with men exactly like you, men who believe their bank account gives them the right to treat other human beings as accessories. I wanted to see if I could survive on my own merits, without the Harrington shield." She gestured around the lavish restaurant. "And I have. I pay my rent. I am finishing my master's degree. And I handle people like you every night for $20 an hour plus tips. And tonight, I learned that competence has nothing to do with the price of your suit." Sterling looked around the room for an ally, but he was on an island. The investors were looking at him with undisguised disgust. They realized they had almost handed billions of dollars to a charlatan, and they had been saved only by the incredible coincidence of insulting the wrong waitress. Mr. Volkov stood up to his full, imposing height. He grabbed the contract he had been about to sign and ripped it in half. The sound was loud and final. "You tried to cheat me, little man," Volkov growled in Russian, throwing the torn paper at Sterling. "If I ever see your face in Moscow, you will regret it." He turned to Isabella, his demeanor softening instantly. He took her hand and kissed it gallantly. "Miss Harrington, you have saved me a great deal of money and embarrassment tonight. If you ever tire of this," he gestured to the restaurant, "my company is always in need of people who can actually read contracts. Name your price." "Thank you, Mr. Volkov," Isabella smiled warmly. "I will keep that in mind." Madame Lefebvre stood up as well, gathering her purse. "Mr. Sterling, consider our letter of intent withdrawn effective immediately. I will be advising my board that Sterling Dynamics is toxic." She nodded to Isabella. "Enchanté, my dear. You are wasted here." Mr. Al-Fayed, who still held the damning report, stood slowly. He looked at Sterling with cold, dark eyes. "You did not just try to defraud us, Grant. You insulted us. You brought us to this table and treated us like fools, employing an incompetent child to translate complex negotiations because you were too arrogant to believe we would notice." He turned to Kevin, the sweaty translator who was trying to hide behind a potted plant. "You will never work in international business again. I will ensure it." Kevin whimpered. Al-Fayed turned back to Isabella. "Miss Harrington, please convey my deepest respects to your father. Tell him that his company's due diligence is, as always, impeccable." One by one, the pillars of Sterling's future walked away from the table. Sterling stood alone amidst the ruins of his empire. The dinner plates were untouched. The expensive wine was unopened. His reputation was not just tarnished, it was incinerated. He looked at Isabella. The rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. He realized the true extent of what had just happened. It wasn't just this deal. The moment these people left this room, the calls would start. The rumors would fly. His stock price would flatline by tomorrow morning. The bank that held his massive loans, a bank that Isabella's father likely had a controlling interest in, would call in the debt. He was finished. "Why?" Sterling whispered, his voice cracking. He looked like a lost child. "Why did you do this? You could have just brought the water. You could have just taken the insult. Why did you have to destroy me?" Isabella looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound pity that hurt him more than the rage. "Because, Grant," she said softly, "you didn't just insult me. You insulted everyone in this room who wasn't you. You mistook kindness for weakness and silence for stupidity. I didn't destroy you. I just turned on the lights. You destroyed yourself. The dining room of the Obsidian Room had become a mausoleum for Grant Sterling's career. The other patrons, realizing the show was over but the consequences were just beginning, spoke in hushed whispers, their eyes darting between the broken billionaire and the regal waitress. Jeffrey, the manager, finally found the courage to approach the table. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He had berated, threatened, and nearly fired the daughter of one of the most powerful men on earth. "Miss Harrington," Jeffrey stammered, wringing his hands together. "I have no words. The way I spoke to you earlier, if you had known who my father was, you would have treated me with respect," Isabella finished for him, her voice calm but sharp. "But because you thought I was just Isabella from Queens who needed this job to pay rent, you thought it was acceptable to snap your fingers in my face and threaten my livelihood to appease a bully like him." She gestured to Sterling, who had sunk into a chair, his head in his hands. Jeffrey flinched. "I am mortified. Please, I hope you won't mention this to the owners. I have a family." Isabella sighed. The anger she felt wasn't really at Jeffrey. He was just a symptom of the system Sterling thrived in. Kiss up, kick down. "I won't report you, Jeffrey," she said. "But you need to understand something. The people who work for you, Sarah in the kitchen, Marco the busboy, they are working harder than anyone in this dining room. They deserve your respect, not because of who their parents might be, but because they are human beings doing a difficult job. Remember tonight, the next time you feel like taking your stress out on them." Yes, of course." "Thank you, Miss Harrington." Jeffrey practically curtsied in relief. Isabella turned back to the table. Sterling hadn't moved. "Jeffrey," Isabella said, assuming command naturally. "Mr. Sterling looks unwell. Please have security escort him out of the building, ensure he gets into a cab safely, and bill his corporate account for the full rental of the East Wing, plus an automatic 25% gratuity for the staff he insulted." Sterling looked up, his eyes red. "You can't do that." "I think you'll find I can do whatever I like right now, Grant," Isabella said. "Consider it an asshole tax." 2 large security guards materialized. They weren't gentle as they pulled Sterling to his feet. He didn't resist. He looked hollowed out. As they led him toward the elevator, past the staring diners, he looked back over his shoulder, one last time at Isabella. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked bewildered, like a man who had walked into a lion's den, convinced it was a petting zoo. The elevator doors closed, sealing his fate. The room seemed to exhale. The tension broke. The background jazz music, which had seemed to stop, became audible again. Sarah, the other waitress, walked up to Isabella slowly. Her eyes were wide as saucers. "Holy crap, Izzy," Sarah whispered. "Harrington, seriously? You drive a 2010 Honda Civic that smells like French fries?" Isabella laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that broke the last of her tension. "It's a reliable car, Sarah, and I like French fries." "I thought you were crazy when you started reading that Russian." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "I was ready to grab your arm and drag you to the kitchen before Jeffrey had an aneurysm. You took down Grant Sterling. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen." "He took himself down," Isabella said modestly. "I just provided the translation." Sarah looked at her friend, really looked at her for the first time in 2 years. "So, what now? I guess you're done with apron life, huh? Back to jets and champagne?" Isabella looked around the restaurant. She looked at the station where she polished silverware. She thought about her small apartment in Queens, her thesis waiting on her desk. She thought about the satisfaction of paying her own electric bill last month. Then she thought about the look on Mr. Tanaka's face when she respected his language. She thought about the power she had felt, not from her father's name, but from her own skill, her own mind. "I don't know," Isabella said honestly, "but I think I'm done hiding." She reached behind her back and untied the apron strings. She pulled the black fabric over her head. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than it should have. It represented 2 years of struggle, of humility, of learning who she was when nobody was watching. She folded it neatly and placed it on the service station counter next to the coffee machine. "Geoffrey," Isabella called out. The manager hurried over. "Yes, Miss Harrington. Can I get you anything? A glass of champagne on the house? The owner's private reserve?" Isabella smiled, a slightly sad smile. "No, thank you, Geoffrey. I just wanted to tell you that I quit." The morning sun over Queens did not sparkle like it did over the East River. It hit the brick wall of the adjacent tenement building and filtered through Isabella's window in a hazy, dusty grey. Isabella sat at her scratched kitchen table, wrapped in an oversized university hoodie that had seen better days. In her hands, she cradled a mug of instant coffee that was rapidly losing its heat. The apartment was silent, save for the rhythmic dripping of the faucet she had been meaning to fix for 6 months. It was a humble, quiet life. The life she had fought so hard to build. But the silence outside was a lie. Inside the digital world, a nuclear bomb had gone off. Isabella stared at the small television perched on her microwave. She had muted the volume, but the chyrons flashing across the bottom of the screen screamed loud enough to be heard in space. Every major financial news network was running the same story. The face of Grant Sterling, usually so smug and airbrushed in magazine profiles, looked grey and hollow in the paparazzi photos being splashed across the screen. She turned the volume up. An unprecedented collapse, a grave-looking anchor on Bloomberg was saying. Shares of Sterling Dynamics have plummeted 65% in pre-market trading, triggering a circuit breaker halt on the NYSE. The sell-off began late last night, following rumors of a disastrous meeting with key international investors. The screen cut to footage taken outside Sterling's penthouse just an hour ago. It showed federal agents carrying boxes, evidence boxes, out of the lobby. The SEC has confirmed they are opening a formal inquiry into allegations of fraud, intellectual property theft, and the concealment of massive debt liabilities, the reporter continued, breathless with the magnitude of the scoop. Sources close to the situation suggest that the whistle was blown not by a corporate insider, but during a dinner at the Obsidian Room, where the discrepancies were allegedly translated in real time to the foreign investors. Sterling's financing has evaporated. The banks are calling in loans. By the time the market closes today, Sterling Dynamics may effectively cease to exist. Isabella watched as a clip played of Sterling trying to rush into a waiting car. He looked like a haunted man. He wasn't wearing his bespoke suit. He was in a disheveled tracksuit, holding a briefcase over his face like a shield. He looked small. He looked like a man who had woken up to find that the world finally saw him for exactly what he was. Isabella turned the TV off. The black screen reflected her own face, pale, tired, but calm. She felt no rush of vindication. She didn't feel the thrill of revenge. Instead, she felt a heavy, finalized sense of closure. It was like closing a book on a long, tedious chapter. Grant Sterling was a symptom of a disease she had spent 2 years trying to escape, the arrogance of unearned power. By taking him down, she hadn't just saved those investors. She had exorcised her own demons. She took a sip of the cold coffee. Her phone, sitting on the table, began to vibrate. It wasn't a text from Sarah, asking for details. It wasn't a call from Jeffrey, begging for forgiveness. The phone buzzed with a long, steady rhythm that Isabella recognized instantly. She looked at the screen. The caller ID didn't show a name, just a location. Geneva, Switzerland. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't spoken to the owner of this number in 730 days. She let it ring 3 times, her thumb hovering over the green icon. She looked around her tiny apartment. The peeling paint, the stack of library books, the freedom she had carved out of nothing. Answering this call felt like opening a door she might never be able to close again. She took a deep breath and swiped right. "Hello, Father." The line was silent for a moment. She could hear the faint crackle of a transatlantic connection, and then the sound of a heavy exhale. "Isabella." The voice was exactly as she remembered it. Baritone, immovable, the voice of a man who moved continents with a signature. But there was something else in it today, a texture she hadn't heard before. It wasn't anger. It was respect. "I trust you have seen the news," Arthur Harrington said. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He never did. "I'm watching it now," Isabella replied, keeping her voice steady. "It seems Mr. Sterling is having a difficult morning." "Difficult is an understatement," Arthur grunted. "He is finished. I just got off the phone with Mr. Tanaka in Tokyo. And before that, I spoke with Al-Fayed." Isabella waited. She traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. "They told me everything, Isabella," Arthur continued, his voice lowering. "Tanaka told me how you honored him with the proper dialect. Al-Fayed told me how you dissected a fraudulent contract in 3 languages without a single note. They were stunned. Al-Fayed asked me why my daughter was serving him water. He asked me if I was insane." "And what did you tell him?" Isabella asked softly. "I told him the truth," Arthur said. The admission hung heavy in the air. "I told him that I had tried to force you into a box that was too small for you. I told him that you left to find your own way. And I told him that apparently you had succeeded." Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. Her father was a titan of industry, a man who viewed apologies as signs of weakness. This was as close as he would ever get to saying he was wrong. "You embarrassed a billionaire, saved my firm's reputation by proxy, and secured the loyalty of 3 of the world's biggest investors in a single night," Arthur said. "And you did it wearing an apron." "I was just doing my job, Father. Sterling was rude. The translation was bad. I couldn't stand by and watch." "That is exactly the point," Arthur said sharply. "You couldn't stand by. You have the instinct, Isabella. You have the fire. I tried to marry you off to the Mergeron family because I thought you needed protection. I thought you weren't tough enough for this world. I see now that I was the fool." Isabella stood up and walked to the window. She looked down at the street below, at the people rushing to the subway, living their lives. "Why are you calling, Dad?" she asked, dropping the formality. "Because Harrington Global is bleeding," Arthur admitted. "Not money. We have plenty of money. We are bleeding talent. We are bleeding vision. I have a boardroom full of yes men who tell me what I want to hear. I have executives who would have let Sterling sign that deal just to get a commission. I don't need more employees, Bella. I need a partner. I need someone who can walk into a room, read the silence, and tell me the truth, even if it hurts." He paused. "I want you to come home. Not to be a figurehead. Not to be a token daughter. The director of International Strategy Desk is empty. It's yours. Full autonomy. You report only to me. You handle the Tanakas and the Volkoffs of the world. You run it your way." Isabella closed her eyes. It was the offer she would have killed for 3 years ago. But 3 years ago, she wouldn't have been ready. She would have been Arthur Harrington's daughter, parroting his opinions. Now? Now she was Isabella. She knew what it felt like to stand on her feet for 10 hours a day. She knew the value of $1. She knew that the busboy, Marco, was more honest than Grant Sterling. "I have conditions," Isabella said firmly. Arthur actually chuckled, a dry, rusty sound on the other end of the line. "I would expect nothing less." "Name them." "I don't want the penthouse," she said. "I'm keeping my apartment in Queens. It keeps me grounded. I don't want a driver, and I don't want anyone referring to me as the heiress. If I take this job, I earn my keep every day. The moment I feel like I'm being treated as a decoration, I walk. And this time, I won't just go to Queens. I'll go to the competition." "Agreed," Arthur said instantly. "Anything else?" Isabella looked at the Honda Civic parked on the street below. It was dented, the paint was fading, and the air conditioning only worked on Tuesdays. "Yes," she smiled. "I need a parking spot for a 2010 Honda, and don't you dare offer to upgrade it." "We will clear a space next to my Rolls-Royce," Arthur said. "We'll see you Monday at 8 a.m. Don't be late." "I'm never late, Dad." The line clicked dead. Isabella lowered the phone. She stood in the silence of the apartment for a long minute. The faucet dripped. Plip. Plip. She walked over to her closet. For 2 years, she had lived in jeans and black uniform slacks. She pushed the hangers aside, reaching all the way to the back, past the winter coats, to a garment bag that had remained zipped since the day she walked out of her father's mansion. She unzipped the bag. Inside hung a charcoal grey Armani power suit, tailored to perfection. She ran her hand over the fabric. It felt cool and smooth. 2 years ago, this suit had felt like a costume, a straitjacket binding her to a life she didn't choose. She had felt like a fraud wearing it. She took the suit out and held it up against her body in front of the mirror. She looked at her reflection. She saw the tired eyes of a waitress who had worked double shifts. She saw the determined jaw of a woman who had stood up to a bully. She saw the intelligence of a scholar who spoke 10 languages. The suit wasn't a costume anymore. It was armor. And this time, the warrior inside it was battle-tested. She thought about the apron she had left on the counter at the Obsidian Room. That apron had taught her humility. It had taught her patience. It had taught her to see the invisible people. She would never forget the weight of it. She would carry that apron in her heart every time she walked into a boardroom. Isabella smiled. It was a dangerous, confident smile, the kind that makes stock markets tremble. "Okay," she whispered to the empty room. "Playtime is over." She tossed the suit onto the bed and began to dress. The waitress was gone. The runaway was gone. Isabella Harrington was back. And the world, especially the Grant Sterlings of the world, had better be ready. What a takedown. It just goes to show that you should never judge someone by their job title. You never know who you're really talking to. Grant Sterling learned the hard way. The true power isn't about how loud you shout, but what you actually know. Isabella proved that intelligence and integrity will always outshine arrogance in the end. If you enjoyed this story of karma being served ice cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to treat service staff with respect. And if you want more stories of incredible comebacks and dramatic twists, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.